Welcome to Law Stories on the Mainstage. My name is Gordon Smith. I am the Dean of BYU Law School, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you here. I just wanted to make a few opening remarks and then turn it over to Amberly Page, who's going to introduce our speakers tonight. I want to say a little bit about the background for this event. Storytelling has become an important part of our program of legal education at BYU Law School. We think it's an essential skill for lawyers and leaders. The mission of the Storytelling Initiative is to teach law students both the theory and practice of great storytelling. And our participants today have been in some training this morning, learning both the theory and practice of great storytelling. And I'm excited to hear their stories. Now, lawyers tell stories because the practice of law is a human-centered endeavor, and storytelling combines the ability to think and organize, to write and to speak. As students engage with storytelling and they practice each of these steps on their journey to becoming an effective storyteller. Now, the law school's storytelling initiative currently comprises three core elements. We have Law Reads, Proximate Cause, and Law Stories on the Mainstage, the event we're holding tonight. Law Reads is a book of the semester program, which is meant to initiate deeper reflection on the role of law in human affairs. And this year we replaced Law Reads, at least in the traditional structure, with a program we called Listen Together, which was a series of monthly discussions on a range of books and articles that was designed to help us understand and dismantle racism. Proximate Cause is a written storytelling competition in which BYU law students are able to practice the skill of short narrative as they share something about how their law school experience has enabled them to affect social change through getting proximate with individuals and communities. And then finally, Law Stories on the Mainstage is an opportunity for law students across the country to meld law, personal experience, and the art of storytelling in written and oral forms. I'm so grateful to all those who have made this possible tonight, to Dean Lynette Rands, to Amberly Page, Sam Payne, and of course, all of the students who are participating. Welcome to BYU Law School and welcome to Law Stories on the Mainstage.
Thank you so much, Dean Smith. We appreciate those remarks and your support. I'm going to just quickly hand this over to Sam Payne, who is our MC tonight. Sam is a nationally acclaimed storyteller and a storyteller and musician who's performed around the world. He's the host of the BYU radio program, The Appleseed, which is an award-winning national radio show that deals with the art of storytelling. So I'm going to turn the time now to him.
It's such a pleasure for me to be here. Listen, from here on out, it's just sit back and enjoy and be moved by these great stories time. Just before we get to that, though, just a tiny little primer on Zoom. If you're joining us, well, I was going to say if you're joining us on Zoom, you're joining us on Zoom, right? Just a couple of tiny instructions. We'd ask you to leave your microphone muted. There are lots of ways to show your appreciation for the stories. That you can wave your hands, they can see you clap, though they won't be able to hear you, and certainly you can post things in the chat window. The storytellers love to see your reactions in the chat window. The way that they've got the interface set up here is that you'll see a large picture of each storyteller and a bio in kind of the main space on your screen as they're telling. But you can see them off to the side as well, giving the actual performance. And if you would like to decrease the size of the big square that has their photo and bio in it and increase the size of the square where you can see them actually telling, you can move your cursor to that space kind of between that block of windows where you see all the people and the larger block that says right now Law Stories on the Mainstage. If you just kind of wave your cursor over that, you'll see a little bar appear that goes all the way from the top of the screen to the bottom. And if you you click and hold on that bar, you can see that you can move it to the right or to the left, and you can increase or decrease the size of the static photo and bio window and the size of the tellers too. Those instructions have been posted in the chat, and we'll post them in chat a couple times. Amberly will. And with that, we're ready to begin. Listen, just a little over 1 year ago, on March 12th, 2020, I attended what would be my last live public event for many months. It was the Law Stories on the Mainstage show right here. And there was a film crew there documenting the events from the Law School Admissions Council. And as the Law Stories on the Mainstage cohort told their terrific stories, the film crew and I were kind of in the background monitoring our phones for breaking news of COVID-19, and we got plenty of news. The internet was exploding with it. By the end of the evening, we were all exchanging glances that we understood even without words. We suspected that this would be the last live event that we would experience for some time, and we were right. It was the beginning of a new era in which we learned to tell stories in a new way. We used to tell stories in concert halls and circus tents, and now we tell stories in little rooms to audiences that we see on screens, audiences that come right into our living rooms, right? And I've often thought that it feels a little bit like telling stories from outer space. And this year's Law Stories is a comment on how indispensable stories have become during this time. And it's also a testament of triumph as we demonstrate that, as distant as we may be from each other, no world distress has been able to keep us from sharing our stories with each other. We've had a rewarding day sharing stories together, the storytellers in this year's Law Stories Mainstage show. And we'll begin with this storyteller. Every year, when we become acquainted with each new Law Stories cohort, we're amazed at the life experiences that inspire in anyone a notion to engage in the climbing of the enormous mountain that is law school. If I had the life experiences I'm hearing about in this story, I find myself thinking, I don't know what I'd do. And we marvel at the courage and the fortitude and self-determination of the storytellers. And we predict that that's how you will react to the story of tonight's first storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, from Albany Law School, with a story called Check This Box If. Please make welcome Mr. Morgan Welling.
Good evening, everybody. I apologize if I cough. I do have COVID right now, so trying my best. So my essay is titled, Check This Box If. Have any of you ever heard the saying, I could cut the tension in the room with a knife? Well, in the room I was seated in, the sadness, anger, and despair could be cut with a knife. These intangible emotions felt like they were grabbing at me, as if they were trying to pull me down to the terrible places where these emotions live and thrive. This room I was in was cold and gray. The metal in the room was icy cold to the touch, like dipping your toes into a cold pool before the summer season has begun. A single white light illuminated this room, casting dark shadows all around me. It reminded me of being in a hospital, where it is always bright, and you can never tell the time. The bright light made sleep nearly impossible. So I placed a thin white bedsheet over the light, and soon nodded off into a restless, uncomfortable sleep. A man walked by, I don't know how much later, and reprimanded me for having put the sheet over the light. I was quickly back to an attempt at finding sleep that was like finding a needle in a haystack. Yelling, screaming, and banging further made the idea of a peaceful sleep seem laughable. The remainder of my night was spent tossing and turning as if tomorrow was my first day starting a new job. In a way, it was. Morning came with only a small addition of light to the room. A single small window allowed me to see the blue sky if I turned my neck and looked hard enough. The position was uncomfortable to hold, and I was quickly back to staring at the gray, hopeless ceiling. A little while later, I realized the new light allowed me to inspect the room closer. And with all the time in the world, you would look at every square inch of a room you were stuck into. There were writings on the wall that marked the names and dates of the last people to occupy this room. I wondered where each of these people were now. Where had their journeys taken them? One person had chosen to spend their time drawing an anime character. Sadly, I was not a fan of anime and could not recognize the character, but I could recognize the amazing detail and realism contained in the picture. The character seemed to be popping off the wall and into the room, when in reality it was merely a group of lines and scribbles. Sitting in this room, I felt as if I had all the time in the world, which can be freeing if you are retired, but I did not have plans of retiring at just 19 years old. Endless free time leaves us with nothing but our thoughts, and it surely left me with my own personal thoughts of insecurity and fears of inadequacy. Many of these thoughts I had been avoiding for a long time. Facing them was like facing the boss at the end of a video game you just can't seem to beat, no matter how hard you try. I tried everything I could to avoid facing these thoughts, but with no distractions, it simply was not possible. Quickly, I was slapped in the face with the realization that I only had one choice. I had to face my fears and the mistakes I had made. Facing these fears was like facing the biggest nightmare a little you could imagine, crawling out from under your bed after the nightlight had broken. A few months later, I was out of the room and filling out a job application. It was about 20 pages of questions and paperwork. It was a job I had already worked the previous couple of summers, and so I was moving through the paperwork at a fast pace. Many of the questions I answered on autopilot, as many people who are filling out paperwork, except for attorneys, do. But I soon came to the dreaded question, the question that had caused a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, the question that had kept me up at night during the last few months when I was unable to sleep. The question read, "Check this box if you have received a felony." I made a mistake. I made stupid decisions, and I have owned the consequences of doing so. But I was lucky enough to have a strong support network surrounding me, made up of family and friends who helped me through my difficult times. Many people are not so lucky. So as I continue onwards through my journey in law school and beyond, I will always remember two important lessons, and I would like everybody else here to remember them as well. First, nobody deserves to be judged on their worst day. Second, it is never too late for anyone to make a change and turn their life around. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Again, as you respond to Morgan, you can, as many are, clapping hands in the screen windows here. Feel free to drop things in chat too. And Morgan, we all wish you well as you recover from COVID. I don't think any of us knew that you had COVID until just this moment. And here you have been in a day's worth of workshops and sharing and rehearsal and things like that. And again, our very, very best to you. Now, when we were listening to these stories earlier today, a number of us commented on what we thought was kind of a compelling relationship between Morgan's story and this next story. It's a story that illustrates the impulse to live an integrated life, to allow our thoughts about the law to communicate with our thoughts and feelings about other things, human relationships, and even the divine. From Brigham Young University, with a story called Gracious Law, here's Melissa Jo Townsend.
Hi, is this Brian? Who the are you? That was my first client interaction ever. And it happened last November with BYU Law School's expungement clinic. It wasn't exactly the introduction I was hoping for. My name is Melissa Jo. I'm with BYU Law School's expungement clinic. I'm calling because you signed up for some help with getting your record cleaned up. Oh yeah, you an attorney? Now that usually isn't a hard question for me to answer. It's robotic now after some 3 years of owning my current title. I'm a student at BYU Law School, just rolls off my tongue. But it didn't that time, not when Brian asked. I think it was because in that moment on that phone call, I could sense what he was looking for, or at least what he was hoping for, a savior of sorts. Someone that could unlock the gate to society and let him back in. That's not me. And unfortunately, it wasn't even my supervising attorney that day. Brian had countless convictions, open warrants, and pending cases, all of which disqualified him from the state's offer of conditional grace under Section 77 of the Utah Code. As a BYU law student, maybe it's not surprising to learn that I'm a religious person. I believe that Jesus Christ is my Savior. I believe that the Bible and other scriptures are the Word of God. And most importantly, I believe that all of that matters because of something called grace, that mighty and mysterious force that lets people change, that somehow swallows up the undesirable inside us all and fills the space instead with something pleasant and even virtuous. To be honest, I didn't come to law school, even at BYU, thinking my legal work would turn my thoughts heavenward much. But there I was, one phone call and a couple expletives away from Brian, thinking about God and contemplating the grace available in heaven and on earth, or at least in the state of Utah, for people that forsake their past and choose to change. I was still thinking about grace as I picked up my phone for the next call, remembering to introduce myself and my purpose first. Before asking the client's name, I cleared my throat. Hi there. I'm a law student at BYU volunteering with the expungement clinic. I'm calling because I'm trying to help with an application. Is this Charlotte? And I will tell you what, a proper introduction can make all the difference. Within a few minutes, I had not only all the information I needed to move forward with the application, but also that sweet anticipation when you feel that something truly remarkable might just happen. Charlotte's entire adult life had been plagued by a few convictions from her youth. Hers were petty things, but serious enough to hold her back in every job, every housing, and every other application that required any sort of background check at all. My supervisor and I carefully reviewed her record. We checked the dates, we scoured the databases, and we searched for anything that would jeopardize the application. And soon, we were convinced that Charlotte would be successful in her petition for grace in the form of a certificate of expungement from the state. I called Charlotte back with the good news as my supervisor and I were filing her application, and the gratitude on the other side of that line was overwhelming. In my mind's eye, I could see the smile on Charlotte's face and the tears rolling down her cheeks as redemption's sweet embrace engulfed her. Finally, the follies of youth, once written with scarlet ink, were fading and slowly becoming white as snow. I floated off the phone after Charlotte hung up. Beaming, I reached out and I nearly jumped on my supervising attorney with joy. Fortunately for her, though, Zoom doesn't have a hug feature yet, and so she was spared the brunt of my enthusiasm, though my excitement was still quite evident. There was simply something remarkable to me about what had just happened, even if it was only the beginning. History, Charlotte's history, was being rewritten, and her future was about to change because of it. Now, to be sure, I don't think I or my supervising attorney did anything particularly miraculous that day. We asked some questions, we got some answers, and then we filled out an online form. Nothing special. But it was clear that there was some serious magic in that moment. So where was it coming from? After a few minutes, I realized its source. It was the law recognizing Charlotte's change. And in its olive branch, it celebrated it. The beauty in that can be hard, perhaps, to explain. But I guess if I had to put it into words, I'd say that it stems from this. The law rewards change with grace. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, we introduced you as Melissa Joe. I ought to say we've all been calling you MJ all day. It's been such a pleasure to get to know each other and get to know these tales. We've spent much of the day together. First, in a workshop exploring storytelling as an art and as a tool, and then in a performance of these stories away from an audience, just for each other. And in that performance together, we had a chance to react to one another's stories for the first time. And we had a powerful community experience with this next story. It taught us many things. Among them, that taking care in the sharing of difficult things can rob them of the power to do continued harm and empower them with healing. From the University of Illinois with a story called Fruit Loops, here's Julia Jones.
One day in September 2020, a week before my 30th birthday, I found myself in a lackluster recreation room eating a bowl of Fruit Loops with a cardboard spoon. Fruit Loops for a loopy girl, I joked. The other patients laughed. Most of us had a sense of humor about our circumstances, which we used to bond during our short stay. We gathered around coloring pages and sidewalk chalk to share stories of pain, grief, and hope. We were so open to growth and healing, yet had no idea where to begin. Some of us had come voluntarily, others reluctantly, but we were all there because our mental health was out of control and we could no longer face it alone. September 17th, 2020. In the middle of my first 2L semester, I went to the ER for suicidal thoughts. An upsetting event triggered it, but it was a long time coming. I was relieved to be getting help, but terrified to face the future. When I entered the hospital, I contacted 3 people: my dad, my friend Melissa, and Dean V at the College of Law. Dean V and I have been speaking recently as I was the chair of a new SBA Wellness Committee. The irony that I am the Wellness Committee chair is not lost on me, I wrote, but I will continue to be open about my struggles in the hope that it may help others. Dean V graciously described my actions as amazing leadership. I spent 2 nights in the ER before they found a crisis bed, and I wondered whether I'd feel happy again. Sometime in April 2020, I was chatting with my friend Melissa about my mental health. I mean, it's manageable, I said. I get through it. By now, the long-term reality of the pandemic was starting to set in. I was finishing up 1L, holed up in my tiny apartment with little human contact for weeks. Getting out of bed had never been so difficult. I was barely eating and stayed up into the night watching TV. When I wasn't depressed, my anxiety was high. I just needed to get through finals. Melissa is nothing if not frank. Julia, she replied, just because it doesn't literally kill you doesn't mean it's manageable. She was right, but I wasn't ready to accept it yet. I sat across from Suzanne sobbing. In a short time, I moved to another state, started law school, and ended a toxic long-term relationship. I came to Suzanne to cope with severe anxiety around these transitions. To my surprise, however, I started to think about something else. 6 months before law school, I left my job of nearly 4 years as a foster care case manager. During my session with Suzanne, I began to recall stories of families I had worked with, stories of abuse and despair. Me in a small room with a 9-year-old banging his head on the wall and turning over a love seat. I told Suzanne the child's story and began to cry. I was shocked by my emotional response. I had talked about the case many times before, but I had never cried about it. Throughout 1L year, I began to notice the profound effect these experiences had on my life. I had never struggled to motivate myself academically, but now it was a chore. I had difficulty concentrating and eventually accepted that I was now a below average student. Who cares about civil procedure when children in my community are suffering? I thought about my kids every day. I had bad dreams and casually brought up topics like child sexual abuse during first dates. My entire worldview had changed. I figured it was vicarious trauma, but again, I talked myself into thinking it wasn't that bad. September 2020 in the hospital. Do you have PTSD? The doctor's question startled me. I said I had trauma from my previous job working with foster children. That'll give you PTSD, she said. Nightmares, yes. Flashbacks, yeah, kinda. And just like that, I had a new diagnosis and no idea what to do about it. It was difficult for me to accept. It seemed absurd that I had PTSD when my kids were the ones with real trauma. I was angry that in my years working for a social services agency, no one told me. No one told me this could happen or how to prevent it. After discharge, the rest of the semester was rough. I scraped by with 2 C's. I was finally able to do an outpatient program over break. I've since felt stable on meds, possibly for the first time in my life. But I know it's not over. To paraphrase Rilo Kiley, the lows are so extreme that the good feels cheap. But I'm learning to feel gratitude in the moment, and I know that I could claw my way out again if I needed to. Spring semester 2021. In January, I enrolled in a family advocacy clinic. We are handling the sort of abuse and neglect cases I worked before, but this time I'm in a new role. My passion for the work is rejuvenated, and I feel excited to serve families in this new capacity. I have a fresh bowl of Fruit Loops, and now I can eat them with a regular spoon.
Thank you, Julia. You know, some of the circumstances and events in our lives that drive us forward, or conversely, that challenge or impede us, are circumstances or events that we chose. But sometimes stuff comes at us that we didn't choose. No one chooses the circumstances that drive the story that our next storyteller will share with you. But as in so many inspiring stories, as in Julia's story, the choices the hero makes in the face of insurmountable odds outside of her control make for the adventure from which we all learn as the story is told. From Albany Law School with a story called A Reason to Fight, here's Renee Liparachi.
Life will challenge you, test you, and give you opportunities in every direction. I found an opportunity amid loss, pain, and severe illness. I thought I knew what I wanted, but it wasn't until death was knocking at my door that my future fell into place. A month before my college graduation, I was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Fear, anger, sadness, and thoughts of the unknown consumed me. As I was set to walk at my graduation, a time that should be filled with happiness, blessings, and fun, I was thinking about my first chemotherapy treatment and how disappointed I was in myself as if I caused this occurrence. I didn't know how to carry on in life with the illness front and center. Prior to my diagnosis in the summer of 2018, I set out on a journey that planned out the rest of my life. I went to officer candidate school with the United States Marine Corps with the hopes of commissioning as a second lieutenant after my college graduation. That summer was filled with challenge, resiliency, new experiences, and friendships. My platoon started with 67 females, and we graduated with 24. I never felt such pride and accomplishment than I did on that graduation day in Quantico, Virginia. Following those days, I had my life planned out. I would accept my commission into the Marine Corps and have a military life for the next 25 years. However, life wanted to put me in a different direction. After being diagnosed with cancer, my dreams of going into the Marine Corps were put on a pause. I must wait 5 years from being medically clear in order to be eligible again. That was harder to hear than being told I had cancer. Something that was out of my control was taking away my dream. For the next 6 months, I would undergo intense chemotherapy that would test my mind and body like never before. I lost all my hair, lost the ability to taste, had chemo leak through my veins, causing nerve damage in my right hand, and felt sick most of the time. My life was a cycle of ups and downs. I would go through treatment and my immune system would drop, Then it would slowly build itself up right in time for my next treatment. It never got any easier. I just got mentally stronger. Through every failure, I got back up and kept going. I never stopped trying to live my normal life and challenge myself. I knew the only way I would make it through this is if I could see myself living my dream 25 years down the line. I had to think about my future and what I could do if my dream needed to be put on hold. I knew I wanted to join the Marine Corps more than ever before and to make an impact wherever I went. I wanted to help people in the way that others have helped me. I sought out law because I had an interest in the military rules and regulations we had to follow during my training, and it felt like the most fulfilling challenge I can make out of my life given my current situation. Becoming a Judge Advocate General in the Marine Corps is very challenging but rewarding. Representing a fellow Marine or being a part of the operations of a training command where your role is important to having the mission completed and objective met is as fulfilling as it gets. All I want to do is fight for people who need it the most and be a part of upholding justice in the armed forces. I've never been afraid of a challenge, especially now going through the hardest battle I believe one can ever face. I spent many days telling my doctors and nurses of my plan once I was done with cancer. My dream may have been delayed, but my goals and aspirations were bigger than ever before. In November of 2019, I could say I'm a cancer survivor, words I never thought would come out of my mouth. Life as I forever know it has changed. My perspective and purpose in the world are different. I'm alive while others aren't. That is why I want to make an impact, challenge myself, help people who are depending on me, take the oath to serve my country, and be a representative for fellow civilians and Marines who need it the most. I'm truly lucky to be a law student and a cancer survivor with a dream that has started to turn into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And to those of you in the audience, thank you too. Thanks for the generosity of your comments in the chat. It's not just like applause with language, it is applause with language. Applause that allows you to actually convey some of the sentiments that you feel with actual words. Thank you for being generous there. Now, because they often seem so composed, so self-assured, even invulnerable after braving a journey through law school, it's easy to forget sometimes that people who become students of the law sometimes do so because of traumas they themselves have experienced, and to which they react by becoming warriors on behalf of those who have experienced the same traumas. You will feel the courage of such a person in our next story. From Albany Law School with a story called The Outlier, here's Lexi Padden.
Statistic 1. 90% of children are abused by someone they know, love, or trust. A loud bang at the door. Everyone shuffles and runs to hide what they know they're coming for. Everyone is yelling and angry, except for one scared little 7-year-old girl sitting on the couch. She is naive about what is happening and doesn't move. She can't even cry. She just sits and watches the tornado touching the ground in front of her eyes. That is, until a police officer takes her hand and walks her to the backseat of his patrol car. As her eyes were big and bold, her breathing became faster. She tried to comprehend what was occurring. The officer looked at her and said, "Smell the roses, see the flower field, and blow the dandelions away." This, a moment she will never forget, and a skill she would take with her into adulthood. There she sat in the patrol car until her grandfather came to pick her up with her life-size stuffed bunny to attempt to make her feel safe in the middle of this storm. Statistic number 2. 20% of child sexual abuse victims are under the age of 8. 2 years later, that now 9-year-old girl is living from place to place with her mother, little sister, and new stepfather. One of the places they find themselves living is with her stepdad's brother, but she knew something wasn't right about this place. Why was there always provocative music videos on the television? Why would he play ball pit with her and the other kids in the garage? Turns out, this man was a registered level 3 sex offender. As her mother goes to smoke on the back porch, the man, now known as a predator, tells the little girl to get in the car with him and his son. Fearful to scream and unfaithful that someone will come to her rescue, she gets in the car. After a drive on the back roads, they arrive at an old farm. Get out of the car and go sit on the counter, he tells the little girl. The son, unattended for, picks up a screwdriver and gashes the little girl's bottom lip. She now has a law guardian who speaks on her behalf in court. She thankfully struggles to pay much attention while there because the judge was always waiting for her with a teddy bear and a bowl of candy. It's almost like she began enjoying going to family court because she knew where she had people to care for her there. Statistic number 3. 1 in 5 teen girls are victims of dating violence. At 13 years old, she turned to a guy to evade the everyday traumas. She started skipping school to hang out with him, avoided her friends, and thought life was finally coming together. That is, until she tried to wear makeup, or until she wanted to post on social media, or until she wanted to spend her own money without his permission. Unfortunately, for a period of time, she thought this type of behavior was normal because this is how she saw her mother get treated her entire life. Turning 16 years old, she knew it was time to walk away from him, but she was too afraid to. Each time she tried to take her things and leave, he would grab her, hold her there, and lock the doors. At this moment, she remembered her grandfather's words. Education is the only way that you can break this cycle. So she applied to college. That next summer, she left the only life she knew to change her life around. Statistic number 4. 96% of women who grew up in poverty do not attend a higher education institution. After a lifetime of being a living, breathing statistic, I am now an outlier. Thus began the basis of the appeal of law school. Furthermore, victims seldom entrust a person who does not have a similar experience to them. As tough and traumatic as my childhood can be seen as, I would not want it any other way. If I did not go through these things, I would not be so determined to educate other young women on how to not end up a living, breathing statistic. At 22 years old, I stand tall, acknowledging my traumas and telling my story to show other survivors that you do not always need to be afraid to seek legal help, that there are attorneys out there who know how to work with these specific types of victims. Moreover, it's one of my main goals to educate those in the legal field who do not know how to properly speak with these victims and help them with their abuse. Those who grew up in poverty, witnessing abuse, and going in and out of the system struggle harder than those who grew up on the opposite end of the spectrum. That life takes years of determination and motivation to change. Determination and motivation that will allow me to put my best foot forward as a law student and future domestic violence litigation attorney. Let it be clear, I was never interested in a pity party. I always knew who I was. It just took a long while of digging to get there.
Thank you, Lexi. Now, our next storyteller is going to do something inspired by a favorite poet. This piece arose from a challenge to talk about a social justice issue, but to talk about it in a form filled not with negative images, but positive images. And in this story, told in the form of a poem, you'll hear the rage and the disillusionment that is there, but you'll hear it through a voice filled with love and filled with hope and filled with light. A law student with an extensive background in psychiatry will bring the poem to you from Wayne State University. The poem is called To the Cashier at the Citgo Station. And here's Lindsay Rose Dykema.
So, my story is actually a poem. I wrote it after a writing workshop given by one of my favorite poets, Andrea Gibson. They gave us a prompt to write about a social justice issue, but to use positive imagery. The idea being that social justice issues tend to stir up a lot of rage, and rage is apparently not always the most effective emotional tool to reach someone. I knew I wanted to write about policing, but I've never written anything on that topic that wasn't tinged with at least the adaptive sort of rage that leads a psychiatrist to take the LSAT. The day before that workshop, I had gotten a text message as part of a group chat of female-bodied people in a 12-step fellowship I belong to. The text was from a sister in recovery, a Black queer woman who shared this story with us. This morning, I'm up caring for a Black woman friend of mine who's having a mental health breakdown in which the police were called. Once she saw me, she calmed down. They left. She's safe. I made her food. She hadn't eaten all day. I listened to her concerns and made her laugh. Another sister is making her some tea, and I'm reminded how important sisterhood is, how important community is, and what it means to show up and give care from your heart. It goes a long way. To the cashier at the Citgo station. One day, a crazy Black woman will come in. She will rant and rave. She will make you think she can't be brave. But here's the thing. Bravery isn't what one chooses to be. It's just what one is. When one who is beaten to death still somehow had legs to take another step, and the next day there was another blazing hot ball of light in the east like clockwork. So she got back up. She has a name, but you can't say it, not yet, because right now you just call her the excrement of flying mammals. Right now, you just call her batched. You'll tense up, crunch some numbers in your head, and it turns out the $9.50 you'll earn this hour is the same amount you'll earn the next hour. And clockwork is funny because this hour is way too long to listen to this woman for another god dang minute. So you'll ask the manager what to do. His answer will be buy the book on Amazon. So Bezos the clown might get you a better job, might pay you circus peanuts minus the freak show. You go buy the book. If a disruptive customer is not redirectable, call 911. But what if you knew 911 is a mine, a stun gun, it's swine come undone, it's a fine, an unsung hero without a cape, but with a firearm? If you knew what it means to call that number, you would know those heroes won't save this woman. Just lock her in a cage till she can calm herself down. They'll make a crime of her rage. They'll arrest her for not being nice to them when they showed up. You would know what it could mean to tap SOS with our intertwined fingers. Samuel Morse didn't mean lethal force. He meant we can save ourselves. So maybe you'll call a different number. Maybe you'll ask her if she has a friend she could call. Maybe she'll call a sister from AA. And if so, there's no maybe. That sister shows up, she'll show up, she'll show up. With a ding of a bell about to save and be saved, she will burst through the door in a shirt and shoes, ready for service. She will show up. She will say her name. She will say, I'm here now. She will say, and you, my dear, you are safe now. She will take her hand, hands held, no hands up. Don't shoot. Don't you see? It's magic. Abracadabra. This woman's been sawed in half, but she's still got those legs, remember? And now she joins with another, a non-binary sibling, a sister, a brother. It's the purest kind of magic. I swear to you. Why call a pig when this woman can call a rabbit, pull it right out of her hat to make room for the halo? You see it now? Angels for each other. The only number worth calling is 911 miles from the nearest bullet. The only law worth enforcing is the law of attraction. Nature abhors a vacuum, but nurture adores a classroom. And you, and you, and you, and you. You can learn now. Did you know scientists once randomized 22 Galago monkeys, all with wounds from chronic self-injurious behavior? 11 of them were prayed for, the other 11 controlled. The ones who were prayed for healed faster. Seriously, they measured the size of each wound with tiny little scab-sized rulers. It's not placebo because they weren't even human. It's not religion because it's just human kindness. It's not science because this kind of healing is called poetry. I know it because I wrote it after a sister loaned it. It's how we call each other by our names. It's how we hold each other up until that blazing hot ball of light pops back up in the east like clockwork and the big hand comes round again to be held and not cuffed because this time you called someone else.
Thank you, Lindsay. You know, today in our workshop, we invited our storytellers to reflect on some of the values that they felt were kind of right down at their core. And our next storyteller said about himself, "I am a person who volunteers." And the thing about volunteerism is that it can take you to places where perspectives might be challenged. When we asked him why he chose to tell this story that you'll hear tonight, he said that he had come up against things that had convinced him that things he had previously thought about as unassailable facts had been thrown into doubt, and in acknowledgement of one of the most important uses of storytelling. He said that he tells this story hoping to learn. From Brigham Young University with a story called Defending Terrorists, Defending America, here's Ben Forsgren.
I never expected to see a terrorist hug an American soldier, let alone an American soldier hugging him back. For as long as I could remember, terrorists had been the enemy. I was in second grade when I watched the Twin Towers collapse on the news. That year at recess, we played Seek and Destroy Bin Laden, digging holes in the gravel to search for his hiding place. I don't know what 7-year-old me would have done if he had actually found any terrorists, but hugging them never crossed my mind. I mused on these thoughts from the viewing gallery in Guantanamo Bay's makeshift courthouse. Years earlier, the Supreme Court held that the government could not deprive Guantanamo's detainees of certain constitutional rights. The result of that decision was to bring law students like myself to observe the due process provided to terrorists. I was assigned to observe and report on the trial of Abdul Rahim al-Nashri, who was accused of bombing the USS Cole and murdering 17 American Navy sailors. With armed guards looking on, I watched the scene through triple-pane glass. The soldier embracing Nashri was one of his attorneys, a broad-shouldered man wearing a pristine white sailor's uniform, the same uniform worn by those Nashri had killed. They spoke briefly before the Marine stationed in the corner of the room barked for us to rise. I stood at attention as the judge strode in and sat down, bringing the session to order. Nashri's attorney squared up to the podium. Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss the case against Nashri. He argued that the trial had been unfair to his client, noting that he was there to relitigate 4 years' worth of hearings because the previous judge was so biased, an appellate court had to vacate every order he had given. More importantly, he argued, the defense team had been sabotaged by the government, which had concealed microphones and smoke detectors to eavesdrop on Nashri's privileged conversations. Furthermore, he paused, lifted his hand for a moment, fingers pressed together, then let it drop to the podium. Your Honor, he sighed, I don't know how to proceed. The prosecution has prohibited the defense from using so many words that I do not believe I can describe the matter further in court. I later learned that a court order prevented Nashri's defense team from discussing sensitive matters in great detail in hearings. Ostensibly, these rules protected national security matters. More likely, though, they were used to prohibit discussions of torture. Torture. It was nearly synonymous with Guantanamo Bay. It was the word not spoken in every oral argument and not written in every brief. Because discussing torture wasn't allowed in court, It wasn't until later that I learned about the detainees' beatings and waterboarding, about forced nudity, sleep deprivation, confinement to insect-infested coffins, head bashing, water dowsing, and even object rape. I also learned that torturers would stage rescues, then increase the torture if detainees cooperated with their pretended liberators. Perhaps this is what had prompted Nasri to ask whether he would be tortured again before he could trust his attorneys. In response, the judge had simply said, "I can't promise you the United States won't torture you again." I can't promise you the United States won't torture you again. Those words ran through my head as I sat in the officers' club later that night, the condensation from my drink slipping down my glass in the humid air. The defense team sat across the table from me, sporting casual shorts and open-collared shirts instead of their uniforms. Despite the light and breezy mood, my thoughts were heavy. For the past 2 years, I had studied the American legal system, drinking in notions of liberty, dignity, justice, and due process. I considered myself a legal disciple, converted to the ideals preached behind podiums and celebrated in casebooks. But here I was in the real world, hearing the courts themselves speak of the treachery, discrimination, and bias in the system. But then again, the smoke from the memory of 9/11 filled my mind. If ever rules should be stretched, shouldn't it be for terrorists? But then again, what if Nasri didn't do it? The thought plagued me. Nasri didn't pray, dress, groom, or worship like the others. He was a clear outlier and an outcast of the other terrorist leaders. And the prosecution had only shown itself to be corrupt in his trial. What if he was just someone caught up in the movement who fit the description? Not the mastermind, but a pawn. My mind traveled back 10 years earlier to another man who would fit a description. My father, chained to a Denver police station desk. For hours, the police falsely accused, interrogated, threatened, and lied to my father. They wanted to arrest a thief, and he looked the part. Vulnerable and victimized, he was at the complete mercy of the system. If not for the defense attorney who took his case and proved his innocence, we could have lost everything. I looked down the table at the attorney who had embraced Nasri that morning. I may never know the extent of Nasri's guilt or innocence, but I silently thanked his attorney for defending Nasri's right to a fair trial and humane detention. By defending a terrorist, he was also defending the best of America.
From Brigham Young University with a story called Autumn Light, here's Mariah Critchfield.
The autumn afternoon was crisp and bright as I shuffled home from the bus. With one hand holding my phone and the other supporting my back, I listened to the last chapters of an audiobook as I plodded along. I was 8 months pregnant, trying to maximize my time en route from campus, and curious as to how The Only Road by Alexandra Diaz would end. The story described the journey of 2 young Guatemalans traveling to the United States after being threatened with gang violence. The audiobook ended when I was about a block from home, and I walked the rest of the way in quiet thoughtfulness. Once inside, I shrugged off my backpack and settled onto one of our kitchen chairs. I sat for several moments, not ready to proceed to the next item on my agenda. My reluctance to rise was for once because of exhaustion brought on by pregnancy, and more because of an inner ache to be still and ponder what I'd experienced while listening to that story. As I mulled over my thoughts and emotions, I considered how we never hear or read stories in a vacuum. Whenever we read a book or listen to another's experience, we do so in the context of our own experiences. As I had listened to The Only Road, I had been coming from a summer full of experiences. The previous spring, I had started an internship with an immigration attorney. Becoming an immigration attorney was my dream, and I was excited to get my first real taste of that line of work and to learn from one of the most experienced in the field. Among other things, my supervising attorney instructed me on the nuances of cancellation of removal cases, so I could draft briefs explaining why non-citizen clients should be able to remain in the United States. Despite my supervising attorney's natural optimism, he was very candid about the reality of the work we were undertaking. It was unlikely our clients' cases would be successful due to the complexities and rigid lines of current immigration law. I quickly fell into a routine during the first weeks of my internship. Each morning, I walked my toddler to a friend's house so she could play while I worked. After returning home, I struggled against waves of exhaustion that hit me as I sat at my desk. I knew that pregnancy took a lot out of me, so I attributed my fatigue to that condition. I was unaware at the time that I was also anemic. While my body quickly lost steam, my mind raced. I mustered up the energy to scrutinize affidavits, analyze how precedential cases differed from our clients' situations, and craft the briefs in a way that explained the legitimacy of our clients' petitions. Some days I would work diligently on a brief, email it to my supervising attorney right as my workday ended, and collapse on the couch to sleep for a few minutes before going to pick up my daughter. I became absorbed by our clients' stories, the trauma some had experienced, the fear of the unknown that they all faced. They were relying on us to help them realize hopes of life in the United States with their families. But we were working within a system that percentages warned would unlikely yield the results we hoped for. I became disheartened. The prospect of success for these cases was not encouraging. The needs of our clients felt overwhelming, and I was physically exhausted, mentally drained, and emotionally spent by the end of each day. I felt more passionate than ever about working in immigration, but I wondered if I would be able to handle work that felt so heavy. As my internship ended, I started my second year of law school. I embraced the back-to-school vibes that came with new classes and falling leaves. I enjoyed the cool air that swept past me on walks like the one that resulted in me sitting pensive at my kitchen table. That day, I reflected not only on the book I had finished, but on the stories I had been immersed in during my internship. The only road had not resolved all the problems swirling in my mind, but it had suggested to me that no matter how difficult the circumstances, hope could still exist. My phone screen suddenly lit up, breaking me from my reverie. I saw with surprise there was an incoming call from the attorney I had interned with over the summer. As soon as I answered, he exclaimed, "Mariah, we won the case." I sat in shock as he told me how one of the clients I had written a brief for had gone to trial, a trial that lasted about 5 minutes. The prosecutor told the judge that he had read the brief and thought the judge should grant the case, and the judge had agreed. After months of working on this man's case and others, I was humbled to have played a part in helping a family successfully navigate the nuances of U.S. immigration law and stay together. After hanging up the phone, I sat a little while longer, my eyes wet, my mind still. And when I stood again, despite the heaviness I had experienced in my body and in my heart for so long, I felt light.
Thank you, Mariah. You know, we've got just one more storyteller for you tonight. And some of the paths that we choose, we take as a reaction against the kind of life we've lived as young people. We want to forge a different path, perhaps, than the path set for us by our parents or our families. Our next storyteller has chosen a path as a student of the law that might seem a departure from some of the ways of her immediate forebears, but far from her path being a rebellion against the ways of those who've gone before her, there is an honoring of those ways in her outlook, and even a hope that she can live as honorably. From Brigham Young University with a story called Papa's Calloused Hands, here's Kiki Cram.
Deep red blood spills over Papa's calloused hands. It is the blood of a chicken, a rooster bred strong, tough, built. Cole, my older brother, sits on the rusted stool, holding the chicken in his lap. Papa uses a sharp blade to cut the comb and all the red tissue of its face. The skin opens. The rooster does not flinch. Papa takes hold of the chicken, places it in its coop, and grips another before placing it in Cole's arms. I stand watching, resting my heel into the calf of my other leg, mesmerized by the grace by which Papa does something that could seem so troubling. But I have seen this before. This is part of Papa's everyday work. He shoes horses for a living, driving his truck all over the island to care for hooves, to trim hair, to file teeth. He leases a pasture for his mules and hunting dogs, shredding the grass, maintaining the fence lines, repairing the gates with his coffee tin of nails and tools. He raises chickens, some bred to sell to fight. He stops at his sister's house to eat lunch on her patio every afternoon, sitting next to Auntie's fish pond filled with koi, sharing stories, remembering. He works leather, he smokes meat, he leaves the static of country radio on for his meal to listen and be entertained. He waits for Grandma to come home from work at the cable office every evening, preparing chicken papaya or Portuguese bean soup before she returns. I grew up on an acre of agricultural land at the foot of a green mountain, where the sounds of the scratchy radio and a hammer or welder or air compressor could always be heard. Only a water-damaged bridge, ditch of taro, and small barn separated our home from the home of my papa. I was influenced by many books, stories, ideologies, and people as I grew, but no influence felt more consistent and more steadfast than the one from Papa, my neighbor, my beef stew provider, my storyteller, my calloused hands to hold. Papa's grandfathers and grandmothers moved from the old country to the sugar plantations for a better life. They worked the fields and lived in the Portuguese and Spanish camps, planting, nurturing, harvesting, and hauling cane. When my grandma wanted to marry Papa, her father asked him what field he worked in. Papa answered, the sugar field. The move from the old country to the sugar field meant a better life for all of us. I do not harvest or haul cane. I do not use razors to cut the combs of roosters. I do not shoe horses or grind meat into sausage or raise chickens or slaughter pigs. I do not have and will never have calloused hands. I read, I write, I study. I put my head down and I work. My papa taught me to do that. I see the intricacies of the law on every page of casebook that I read. I see them through the lens of the land I grew up on and the people that I love. I observe the injustices in the stories. I think, I scratch, I learn. I see the blood spilling. I see things that are troubling. I try for grace. This will be part of my everyday work. My hands are soft. When I sit in the patio with Papa and place my hands in his, they are small-boned, gentle, petite. My hands will never become hardened, but I will work. I will work people who need for help. I will work to ensure that they're cared for. I will work for my family. I will work for my island. I will work for people with roots like mine and roots that are not like mine. I will work to fulfill their needs. For many years, I experienced feelings of envy towards my papa, towards Koa, towards the talent they possess and the work that they do with their hands. Papa has always worked with his hands. Koa builds homes for a living. For many years, I have stood watching, resting, mesmerized. Koa would drive me past his latest job sites. I'd think he worked on that with his hands. He put in that deck with his hands. That house on that hill he built with his hands. I would look in my hands and think, what will these hands ever be able to do? Sometimes now when I sit at my desk, casebooks, outlines, and post-it notes open in front of me, I look at my hands. I think, I scratch, I learn. These hands will hold important texts. These hands will hold briefs and notes and arguments and burdens. These hands will hold many hands, hands like Papa's, hands like his grandfathers and grandmothers, hands like Cole's, hands like mine, through bloody, troubling things. And these hands, my small, soft hands, will hold them with grace.
Thank you, Kiki. What a wonderful story to end on. That's the end of our storytelling adventure tonight. You know, we talked to the storytellers earlier in the day and encouraged them to take this body of work, these 10 stories that now represent the stories of this Storytelling on the Main Stage cohort, and go back to them, keep them as a keepsake, as an artifact of this time. And to you who have been listening, we encourage you to take your thoughts that have arisen from the stories that you've heard tonight, and to discuss them write things down, mark them in some way that you might remember this body of work that you've experienced. Some of you count these storytellers among your loved ones, and marking their stories is something that will reward you. We always hope that in a show like this, filled with stories, that the stories that you hear might spark memories and thoughts for you that you can share with the people that you love. That kind of storytelling can make for memories that last a lifetime. It's been a great pleasure for me to be with you, and I'm going to turn the time over for just a moment to Amberly Page at the end of our time together.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you, Dean Smith, and especially thank you to the storytellers. I feel this is the third time I've heard those stories, at least the third time, and it has felt like a gift to me every time. I feel like that's one of the great things that happens with story. It's a gift of ourselves that we give to one another, an opportunity to build and create empathy, and I feel so grateful for what's been shared today. If you are interested in watching these or hearing these stories again, they will be posted on BYU Law Stories on the Mainstage website. And you can also see there the stories that have been told in previous years. Again, we appreciate all of the work and effort that's gone into this, and appreciate Candace Poole for her assistance with this, Lynette Rands and Kristen Gertie Kyle as well. And so with a final round of applause for our storytellers, we'll say good night. Thank you.